Zeichnen.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I just do an intro, I don't know why. So hello and welcome. Tonight we have our maybe 7th Campfire session. We're very proud to host Bart Papagei together with Susan Hasty from Raleigh, United States, and Bart is from Netherlands. And I don't know, so what is really the session about today, about negotiation and how important it is in enterprise design or something. So maybe Susan wanna take over, or Bart, I don't know.
Now let Susan start. It's her topic.
I'll ask you guys, what are the challenges? You had, in the write-up, Wolfgang, you had mentioned the challenges in negotiation. What do you perceive to be, I'd like to hear what everybody says about what you perceive negotiation to be, because that has a big bearing on how good of a negotiator you are, or how well your outcomes are.
So are you asking me or anybody, everybody?
Yeah, everybody.
But feel free to start, Wolfgang.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
how do you perceive, how do you experience negotiation? Because it is I get a very visceral reaction from people.
Yeah, I think that design is very about negotiation and negotiating various interests. Whenever you have a group of co-designers, everybody has interests. Everybody, of course. And then you're in the room and people usually seem collaborative maybe, and maybe there are some hidden agendas. And maybe these negotiations are not made visible to everybody. So there is something going on behind the scenes that is maybe not visible, and maybe some co-design process does not advance because there's something hidden. And if you don't understand that the co-design is also about power and interest and that stuff, maybe you miss a point, and that can usually be a constraint. So I was a huge fan when you told me about your ideas of clean negotiation, because I think that's a skill you need when you meet other people, because with intersection we say, okay, it's about co-design. Many disciplines, various departments meet, and everybody wants to achieve maybe a slightly different thing. And how do we deal with that? And it's not only about creating a Milky Way or some maps. Yeah, so that's usually we talk about maps, and it's all fine and edgy and so on. But what's going on behind the maps? The unspoken stuff, right? And how can we make it explicit and can bring the skills to better negotiate in this negotiation space? That's maybe interesting. I want the answer now. I want the answer today, please.
Yes, you want the answer now and today, and so the interests and the appearance of collaboration, yet there's some covert motivations that are maybe steering things toward people's personal agendas, hidden agendas, and also the map. In other words, there's a landscape that you're navigating. Is that?
Yes, I think our work focuses a lot on this geography, Milky Way, enterprise maps. That's all fine. So that's a communication tool to make things visible. And probably there are some conflicts also visible, because you need to agree how to call a capability. How is this all related? So I think this edgy stuff makes things and conflicts maybe visible, but it doesn't mean that people that playing this board game, for me, this Milky Way is kind of a board in a board game, and then you have some pieces and have a group of people placing their pieces, and it's not only about design, it's about negotiation and having transparency. I think it opens also, it provides transparency and helps people to discover those conflicts. Transparency means you can discover them, unveil them, and make them visible, maybe.
So and yeah, comparing it to a game actually, I think has a lot of use, because when you play games, you want to know the rules. Yeah. And oftentimes in negotiation, the rules are unclear because people may be playing by different rules.
I have another association that I want to bring in, and that is that when you navigate a landscape, the landscape is there and you need to discover what it allows you to do. when you navigate a virtual landscape, like a Milky Way map, you're not just revealing the landscape and figuring out where it lets you go, you're actually creating it as well. So don't forget that the map you're negotiating about is also the map you're negotiating as you create it.
Yes.
Right? So you're navigating the map and you're negotiating what it looks like, which I think is part of the confusion, where people don't know what they're actually arguing about. Are we arguing about the map, or are we arguing about the choices and the power and the relationships?
Yeah, and usually these are two dimensions, and you always have these two layers maybe, and they are not made transparent. And people say it's only about content, it's only about how do we call this capability, how do we play this game, how do we play these game pieces. And it helps a lot if you, I think it, I don't know how we should deal with it, but I think it helps a lot to bear in mind that there are these two dimensions. That's interesting.
I would like to hear from some other people, actually.
Yes.
Otherwise, we take over. Jean-Sebastian.
Yeah, maybe I can. Like, to me, I'm doing workshop most of the time, so a facilitation workshop. So to me, it's all about creating this conversation and like making sure stuff that should be part of the negotiation is mentioned, so people can make decision and negotiate based on equal rights. I mean, we're here to talk and to understand. And then there's the negotiation part. But then again, like, not everything should be negotiated. Not everything is a democracy. So I kind of make sure like there is as less debate as possible, because this is someone's responsibility. You are now informed, you get to choose. So there's as little debate as possible, so people don't get lost into, I think that, I think this. Do you have data? Do you have skills to back that up? So no, so there's no negotiation to have. We just don't know. So I kind of want to have as less negotiation as possible. Is it someone's responsibility? He, she will get to choose. Or is it a democracy? Then we can debate if it's a shared something, but as little as possible for me.
So what I'm hearing is valuable, because your role as a facilitator, if that's not made clear, then part of making the game rules clear is making your role clear, because whether you are you have, there's very different time constraints. And in reality, negotiation is emergent. And unfortunately, so many of the models try to make it look linear and tactical, when in fact it's quite political. And to the point about democracy, that is one of those perceptions around freedom, and there's actually read a fascinating paper that said negotiation is all about entitlement.
This is when I create my workshops. Usually it's not a single workshop, it's a series of workshops that have an endpoint, a clear objective. We always start by figuring out who are the stakeholders and why they are important. Should they be there? Should they not be there? And who am I talking to? And are we missing someone around the table? So if we have an objective and we are missing some people, it's going to mess up the end result at some point. So it's super political, even though I'm just like doing the basic stuff as a designer, like creating a website. I need to know who I should talk to.
And what, so I call myself a choice architect, because this is exactly the point of do people know they have choices? Back to what Bart was talking about, and a lot of times people don't. They don't realize how they're creating artificial constraints. And in addition, the conversation. I would kind of differentiate between communication is structural, but conversation is strategic. And so we have to understand what is the strategy, what is the impact of of not making things clear, not making things transparent, and quite frankly, the main weapon today of authoritarianism is information.
Yeah. Or rather, the withholding of information or the misinformation. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Propaganda.
By the way, I couldn't help grin because when Jean-Sebastian says it's not a democracy, my first reaction is, can we vote on that?
No.
It's not always a democracy.
I can't help myself. The fact that it's not a democracy is one of those things that we dance around a lot in negotiations. So we don't make it explicit what the boundaries are of what we're negotiating. And now I'm talking about enterprise design specifically, where we keep pretending that everything is nice and everybody is cooperating, as Wolfgang said, and then we run into boundaries that we haven't actually made explicit, and then everybody gets upset because then someone has to stop it. I'm convinced that if you make those boundaries clear up front, then a lot less discussion would happen, and we could negotiate about the things where the choices actually do exist. That's one side. So yeah, yes. I think it's a good idea. I don't want to take over. Kina.
Yeah, it's actually it's funny that you mentioned this with the boundaries. It's been mentioned, I think, between the lines of the other ones as well. Because I get this. Somehow this drags me into, I think, the thought of speaking of where I am in the world with Norway, the Norwegian culture, because this is I had this sort of realization when we started the meeting, or when Susan asked about the negotiation, and I thought it's a very unfamiliar word for me in Norwegian, obviously, because it's not a word we use much in Norway in a business culture.
What do you use?
That's the thing, because we don't actually, I mean, it's the structure in Norway is very flat and it's very democratic. So it's a kind of a hard word, I think, in that sense, because you use words like collaboration and transparency and democracy and all of this. And to use the word negotiation, I think it would be a bit hard.
It's almost aggressive in your.
Yeah, exactly. So the only times you actually use the actual word is, say, salary negotiation, where it's more okay, the phrase basically, and it's given that you discuss this. But then I kept thinking about it, and I realized, well, a lot of what I do, even though I might not use the words, I'm still doing it, obviously, and I'm facilitating it in a different way than Jean-Sebastian, but still kind of, I tend to say it doesn't translate too well, but I tend to say that I often kind of sewing the common threads and kind of showing kind of where these are the different scopes, these are the kind of the borders, as you said, but and this is kind of and I think somehow then navigating the negotiation space, I suppose. So I do a lot of that, and I do a lot of facilitating discussions and bringing up that transparency, and then using often maps or visualizations to kind of bring that out and to facilitate these discussions. But it's just interesting for me how the culture is so.
Well, Susan and I had lots of discussions about the combative connotation of negotiation for many people. They immediately think about there's a conflict, so we need to negotiate. But exactly. Susan actually changed my mind on that when she came with clean negotiation, where she says it doesn't start with conflict. That's not the necessary starting point for a negotiation. Isn't that right, Susan?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we get into, as we're moving into a world where boundaries are breaking down, boundaries are morphing. Our social norms, our cultural norms are starting to morph and blend. And when you think about culture, we really don't realize how much our culture and our education and our family and our tribes impact our perception and how we perceive, because I find that negotiation for people is both sacred and I want to say toxic, but that visceral, visceral, because people don't want to be taken advantage of. And yet but you have to understand that when you look over the course of society, and as we have come from a very hierarchical, caste-based, imperialist, colonialist system, we are just in the last 50 years, have we actually had choices today that most people didn't have 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. And some people in the world don't have choice, as we've seen. I mean, in other words, and people will fight for that. So our freedom is something, our freedom and also our drive to create. That is human innate needs. And so we're getting into where if we don't understand how we create, how do we co-create? And so when we talk about design, we are talking about co-creating pathways and landscapes and ecosystems that that demand that we think and we are conscious about our negotiations. And so the context is so important. First, we have to negotiate the context. In fact, part of some of the best training I've had on negotiation, you first negotiate the negotiation process.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of setting the roles. And so it's the clean aspect of it is two things. One is being able to use clean language. If you guys aren't familiar with it, I strongly recommend looking into it. It actually is a way to actually bring out people's tacit understanding of things. But it's also a way to investigate what is the context, what is the boundaries, what order do we need to go in, what is your perception of order? I mean, we could actually have a full conversation about that. And all of those are going to play into how we perceive it and how we perceive our role in it. And so our ability to navigate the dynamics of it is actually a capability that is anyone here familiar with dynamic capabilities?
Dynamic, there was a paper from TISA that is called Dynamic TISA.
David Teese, yes.
Okay. 2007.
Yes, and actually he's an economist.
Yes.
And he recognized, one, he's also an incredibly successful entrepreneur, and he recognized that we have to innovate, we have to be more entrepreneurial, but also how we go about it. And he doesn't use the word negotiation, but it is all about negotiation, but more importantly about what we talk about a lot is value creation, but we also have to think about value capture. And so when you look at the dynamics of politics, and when you look at, in fact, I looked up the word dynamics. If you look in the political space, it's political negotiations, social engineering. Okay, because our culture is social engineering. And when I looked up that terminology, I found a distinct difference in how it is defined in technology. Is like it's toxic, but how it's defined in political science is it's expected.
So can you explain that a bit?
Well, because political science is all about social engineering. That's what policy is
So
that they are trying
the
to
term
drive
social
behavior.
engineering is hated in IT and loved in politics. Is that what you're saying?
So if I looked it up on Wikipedia, just because I was trying to, I always, take words and, understand how language has a lot to do with how we're perceiving the world. And in Wikipedia, if you look up social engineering in the context of technology, it was I can't remember the wording, but it was
all
it was
negative.
like it was very negative. And in political science it wasn't.
Well, here's news for you. Maybe you knew this, but the word politics is negative in IT. If you just say politics, they all go, oh, go away, Satan, get thee behind me. In hardly any other discipline is politics that negative as a term. So yeah, there is something there that we as a discipline seem to dislike intensely.
Well, and I think that mainly that kind of comes back to the fact that we have for eons left our politics and our policy making up to those people on the hill.
Yeah.
And so the word governance, good example. Governance is policy, but it also is, we're trying to drive behavior. And so that's why I was bringing up the economics, because really the theories behind economics has always been, we're always rational actors. We're always and we're either always looking at win-win or win-lose, when that's not the case at all. Unless we're conscious of our negotiations, what we're going to get, I use the term, it's not what we do that matters, it's what we do repeatedly that matters. and you will find that we all have defaults that we steer toward, because there is not a better, there's no optimum, there is more balance, and understanding that, in fact, I've got I want to hear back also. I want to hear from the other people here about how they're perceiving negotiation. Or I tell you what, let me use a screen share, and I want to share.
I just want to note one comment here, and that is in relation to the discussions we've had about design as negotiation. I think one of the things that engineering types need to realize is that they tend to want to negotiate the hard stuff, which is the technical stuff, because they feel that at least there you can get yes/no answers. It's either right or it's wrong. But you can never separate those negotiations from the soft stuff, where people have opinions and power and interests, as Wolfgang started. And I think one of the confusions is that we think we can separate that. Or there's technical discussions, but they have a clear yes/no answer. And then there's political stuff and everybody does what they like. I think it's always intermixed. And that is one of the issues, I think, of design.
And defining who has power, who has authority, who has decision rights. And that's something that, if you don't know that, then it's understandable. In fact, I had someone say to me, we negotiate all the time and we never get anywhere. And I'm thinking, that's not negotiation.
That's a ritual.
It's a habit.
It's a habit
of not coming to, what you'll find is that so much of negotiation, you've got, one side that's dominant, right? But you also have the avoidant behavior. And then you have the passive aggressive behavior. And all of those things are things we learned growing up. Those are things that we inherited from our family. And so we, in making it clear so that we hold space for people having a say, but understanding that there still needs to be, even in emergent situations, there still needs to be someone who is taking a lead, or someone who, or some way to come to a conclusion. And so it's and that's something that might be worth exploring beyond the scope of the time we have together, is specific, every situation. And I would say that if you step back and look at it, I ask people to record or make a log or daily log. What choices did you make today? Now, I actually started out in working with leaders saying, what decisions did you make today? But you know what? People could not put their finger on what decisions they made. But if you ask yourself, what choices did you make today? What the feedback that I've gotten has been that no two choices are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So no two negotiations are ever the same because you always have a different mix of the order of what's going on, the boundaries that's going on, and it's constantly moving and emerging and evolving and coming up, because it is not a you don't know everything, and in fact, the more you think you know, then the less you really know, and that's where I think problems come in. And in fact, Wolfgang, can I share my screen? And I want to share. So I had done a study on. I'm still.
So while you're bringing up your screen, we should also let the other people.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just a reminder, because I know that we hog the conversation easily, don't we?
So yes. So what other? Look, a good way to ask this, if you're unclear about it, is negotiation for you is like what? John, I'm going to call on you.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the slide you're sharing and thinking of the question you're asking and get a bit confused.
Yeah, seems no relation to the slide.
I'll tell you what, let me go back to that one. So, Wolfgang had mentioned, the uncertain environment, the rules about roles, confusion and chaos, but those are ambiguous. What negotiation challenges, what negotiation for you is like what?
Exactly what Wolfgang said. It's uncertainty about what we're negotiating about. And much of the situations I've been in as a manager in government or as a company owner with clients and stuff, we spend a lot of time on shooting into what are we actually talking about, negotiating about, and then negotiation is sort of that we have some kind of we drawn the map that now we're negotiating about this consulting gig, and should it cost 10,000 euros, 100,000 euros, then we're negotiating, right? So we have some agreement about the context, but typically it's all the stuff that goes before the negotiation that's really the difficult stuff.
Now what we're negotiating about, I mean, that's actually that's even clearer, because what we're negotiating about is about context.
Yeah.
What is the context of what we're negotiating, and what Wolfgang talked about as far as the interest goes, the hidden agendas. So negotiating the rules about how we're going to come to an agreement about what we're negotiating about is important.
It becomes recursive, doesn't it?
Yes.
And when for me, negotiation also has this connotation to being antagonistic.
Yes.
And I mean, being an old Marxist and stuff, I think, yes, there's antagonisms everywhere and everything, so fine. But being dialogical and facilitative and all the soft stuff we want to do and co-create and co-design and so on. Negotiation is sort of a dangerous. You could choose other, if we say choice architecture and think about behavioral economics and behavioral science for choice architecture, there could be other choices than negotiation.
Yes.
It's interesting.
And so when you think about creating value and co-creating value, what I've found in the research is that most value is created within the conflict. And to your point, John, about what we're negotiating about, that actually is a great container to think about, what outcomes are we trying to get out of this? Because we do have to think about it this way. We do have to have a conversation about how we're going to claim value, and we need rules around how we're going to claim value. Otherwise we end up disappointed, and we end up perceiving failure at the very least. I was going to show you guys. So I did when you look at value creation and project management and value that's destroyed, the uncaptured value. If you come up with a scope of work for a project, you're making assumptions. You're making assumptions about how that value is going to be primarily delivered. So you're not even thinking about what value could we create beyond what we know about. And so what happens is that the value is certainly, there's a certain amount that is destroyed when two people can't come to an agreement to even begin the work. But most value is actually destroyed once you've actually started the work. And so you've actually within the terms of a contract. So this is why thinking about negotiation is an emergent property, emergent phenomenon that you really don't have control over. You have control over how you're going to respond. You have control over what you're going to contribute and how you expect to be compensated. And understand that we're not just talking about financial capital here. We're talking about social capital. We're talking about reputation. So, but this was actually, as far as projects goes, and everything, all transactions can come down to a project. It's because things are out of context, out of order, and out of scope. So I actually took that and said, okay, how do we? Let me come back. Yeah. How do we put our choices in order and put things in context, negotiate the context, and negotiate the boundaries? Because as boundaries are morphing, and boundaries can be our roles, boundaries can be our scope, boundaries can be the political power. It all comes down to how do we contain that so we can get to work? Because negotiation can overtake getting things done, and so not to scare you entirely, but here's what's going on when you're negotiating, and I'll give you a minute just to look over that and respond.
Yeah, just a question about context and boundaries. How shall I say that? Does it mean we must negotiate that we understand the context in a similar way? Do we agree on certain things that are going on in context? And how is this related to the term boundaries? Yeah. Does boundary mean how much freedom do I have in my design challenge? Or
absolutely,
am I restricted by some political forces that I cannot change?
Yep. So the context is very much about what is the domain we're actually talking about. Do we understand it in the same way? Do we limit it to something that is within scope, right? Because that's part of the problem. If it hasn't been explored, people may have completely different context in mind and not even know it. But then when you come to the boundaries, sometimes, and I know that John, you're right about the connotations of the word negotiation on one level. For a lot of people, it has a negative connotation, but it's actually a social reality. And in social science, it has much less of a negative connotation. It's just a fact of life. But you have, for instance, a word like the non-negotiables. It's very enlightening to get the boundaries clear in terms of non-negotiables. These are things that we cannot change, so we shouldn't even try to negotiate about it because they're given. And very often you find that the people with the most power struggle the most with their non-negotiables.
Yes.
But they're not going to tell you.
Well, yeah, and quite frankly, you don't sit down and say, here's my interest, here's my position.
No, you don't say it like that. No.
Well, so this is why
it's a pity, really.
Well, but you do want to. So negotiation is 90% investigation.
Yeah. Well,
I'm going to say that again.
Yeah.
Negotiation is 90% investigation. And so by knowing when to and how to pull those things out, but this is the thing about value creation, is that if you really to really pull that out is to understand that what is non-negotiable for you is probably very different from my non-negotiables.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now you start getting, think of canvas. Now you start getting the constraints to work within.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, so coming back to the freedom, what somebody perceives as freedom, personally, I am inquiring on what is that person's worldview? What are they? And you can, if you listen, you can hear in their language if they come from a place of power over, power, or whether they only perceive dominance. One of the biggest challenges in negotiations is someone who's coming to the table with a fixed pie mentality. Because they're going to fight for the largest piece of the pie. And so if you come to that negotiation with an expectation to grow the pie, can I tell you who's going to lose out? So we need flexibility to be able to understand that you're going to have to negotiate differently with people based on their own worldview. But the better part of strategy is when to say no.
But doesn't it mean, I mean, to make this work means that everybody involved in this negotiation space, design space, whatever, agrees to this clean negotiation and has this understanding what's going on. Because if it's not sufficient that I, maybe as an enterprise design coach, enterprise designer, whatever, know what's going on. If the people don't know it, if they don't play the game, play this kind of clean, I like this term, clean negotiation. Yeah. So if they don't want to have it clean and they don't play the game, then what can I do?
That's something that I encountered often, and I think I very often make the choice then to stop and say, look, we're playing a different game here. Let me be clear about my intentions, and then we can decide if we have a conversation or not. Very often they don't even know that they're engaged in a power game and that they're engaged in a fixed pie thinking, because it's a habit. They're not consciously doing it. They're just doing it out of habit. And if you stop that and say, let's take a step back. This is why I'm here. Now, do you want to be here for that purpose too? Then we can have a conversation. If not, then we go our ways. Now you have to be prepared to take your loss there, by the way. You have to not do that out of self-interest. You have to say, I will have this conversation for everybody's interest or not at all.
And
right? Win-win or no game.
Yeah.
Jean-Sebastian, you have your hand up. Sorry. You must be tired by now.
Yeah. No, this is something like you were saying. I took note, and I wanted to talk about that because like the whole knowing the rules, and then you talked about the when to say no. Where I used to work, there sometimes you switch boss and the game change. But at the end, a boss that didn't want to state the rules changed the rules all the time to be able to win an argument, which is sometimes is data, sometimes is common sense with big quote mark there. And now that I'm working as a freelancer or a business owner, or I'm just starting, like I know the game when I need to negotiate with clients, and I know, or at least I have the capacity to say no. I have the right to say no. Where I used to be told that it's not a choice. We're paying you a salary, and this is what will happen, and this is what you will do because authority argument, empty authority argument there.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest myths in business, I think, is that the customer is always right. I mean, and you're not doing that mindset, as well as the fixed pie mindset. But the fact is that people don't know what they don't know, and if you're wise in how you're asking the questions up front in the initial scoping, then you're not only helping yourself, you're also helping them get what they want and what they need. But we have to understand, how do you define success? In fact, anytime you're entering into a new engagement, a new relationship, how do you define success? What would you like to have happen? Having those conversations and getting people to provide you with their own landscape of what does success look like? What is the context that I'm going to be able to meet your expectations? That's actually is this feedback loops. It's just feedback loops.
Yeah. John, you have your hand up too. So I'm trying to be fair.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
So just to, I mean, now you mentioned social sciences. They are very wide, and I remember from doing a PhD in social science how diverse social sciences is. So just to point out that in certain parts of social sciences, boundaries are actually part of the communication structure. So Bourdieu's concept of boundary objects is actually extremely relevant when we talk about co-creation and co-design, because it's all the stuff that cuts across our disciplines that is tricky, but also that helps us co-create and co-design. And I think if I haven't thought of it deeper, but I wrote a bit about boundary issues and boundary objects and how architects could work with it. So I would say negotiation and the whole choice architecture is all about understanding boundary objects.
It's not all. I don't
and maps
say all, but there's a lot of
beloved maps are boundary objects for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the individual, we have boundaries. Physical boundaries, psychological boundaries, personal, social boundaries, political boundaries, and so you use the term recursive. There is systems within systems within systems, and to your point about how. So if you look at the across, I've worked in a lot of different disciplines and industries, and what is fascinating, and I don't know that a lot of people are aware of this, but the failure rate, and I use that in quotes for a reason, the failure rate of mergers, acquisitions, projects, partnerships, businesses in general, across every industry is virtually the same. Now, how can that be? So it's not industry specific. It's not size specific. It's not culturally specific. But what I find when I really dug into the research is that very, very seldom is the outcomes defined. The strategy's defined, the goals are defined, but very seldom is there a consensus in what outcomes are we trying to achieve here. And Wolfgang knows, and Milan knows that I have harped on outcomes because your language for outcomes matters.
It's in the core elements, you know that.
Is what?
It is in the core.
It's in the core, in the very core. We have people and outcomes, so just for you, not just for everybody. No, it's not
Well, as we enter into more uncertainty, the thing is that marketing, there's marketing where you're saying, here's what we can do for you. And then there's propaganda, which is just, it's this ideal that, that we don't understand how words impact us. And so coming up with that language, one, it comes down to who has the power to allocate resources. And so who's accountable for defining those outcomes? Is it, and what you're going to find is that, is it the boards? Is it the project manager? Is it the leadership teams? Quite frankly, I've worked with leadership teams that they struggled coming up with the language of what does your organization have to do every day, all along the way, 100% of the time, to ensure your company survives. Now, imagine if you went to a hospital and said, "Oh, we only reach our outcomes 60% of the time." Right? So, and yes, when you struggle, when you are negotiating that outcome language, you are in the process of sense making. You are meaning making. You are actually creating coherence. You're creating resonance because we are pattern and meaning making creatures. We have to be able to understand and make sense of things to be able to navigate, to flow, to move. And the worst thing that can happen is when people stand still. You have to keep moving. And so understanding that we need to build our capabilities, our negotiation capabilities, our dynamic capabilities, because that's how we get better, just like we get better at playing music. It's not, negotiation is not an intellectual game. You feel it. And so when we perceive negotiation as I'm going to lose something, or I've got to win something, then we're going to avoid it. We automatically enter into that space with a disequilibrium in our energy flow. So we first have to understand that we have an energy flow that we're bringing to the table. And then we get into the information flow to navigate how we're going to coordinate our work and how we're going to negotiate commitment. Because if we're not committed, then why even do it? That's currency. That's social capital. Are we committed? And so when Brad and
Susan, I'm gonna interrupt you here because I know what's happening. You're trying to put all 3,600 slides into the last 5 minutes. I'm not sure that we're going to get there.
Thank you.
But we have a few people that have been silent. I know that Ibtisam has been on the line, but carefully hiding herself. Mani is there. Milan, I don't even ask. Hans joined a bit later. So maybe Ibtisam, maybe you were there from the start. Maybe you have some wisdom to impart on this company, or observation, or negotiation even.
Yeah, sorry, 1 second. I was just listening in with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my input was that hold on, just 1 second.
Yeah. We can also go to Mani first. Mani?
All right,
hello.
sorry, guys.
Mani was just going, just starting.
I apologize. Yeah, so to be honest, I mean, when I had the discussion with Suzanne, because I think we were in a while back, I think sometime in January, we discussed negotiations and everything. And I think I brought up the point of, so what I really liked about what Susan said is that it's 90% of research is what you're doing during a negotiation. And I completely agree with that, because it takes getting to know the person that you are trying to negotiate with, trying to understand their perspective and what it is that they are trying to get out of this negotiation. And I think what a lot of people forget is that is the purpose of the negotiation itself. So that it is you trying to find out what the other person is trying to do. It's a little bit strategic, but a lot of people don't like approaching negotiation from a strategic perspective. It is more, say, going in and thinking of what I want as an individual, what I want to get out of it. So I think, that it should be approached in a manner where you as an individual are trying to understand, strategically understand what the other person is trying to get out of it. And mirror that in your quote unquote arguments that you were trying to bring to the table when negotiating, but at the same time not losing sight of what you're trying to negotiate for. So I think having the balance and trying to find that how do you call it, midway, so to say, where you're able to do that research but still keep intact whatever it is that you're trying to negotiate for, is something that a lot of people struggle with. And to be honest, I don't know what the trick is to kind of get that balance and maintain it. I think a lot of people still play around to see what it is that they can do to kind of achieve that 50-50 balance of doing the research and negotiating for themselves.
Very good. I'm glad you reminded us, because if it's 90% exploration, right, then most of us get it horribly wrong. The ratio is, for most people, not even 10% exploration, in my experience, because we go in knowing what we want and we're going to get it.
Yeah, I agree. Exactly. I think, and that's what sometimes makes it, for some people, I would say, it makes their negotiation unsuccessful, because they go in with such a stubborn mind, and just like a bullet train, they're going full speed ahead for what they want to get out, to negotiate for, and they don't know that them doing that damages and kind of destroys their ability to kind of build somewhat of a relationship with the person that they are negotiating with.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us back to Susan's the destruction of value, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Mani, you were going to say something too, and you have -1 minute, but I'm sure you can manage.
No, I think that let me just make up one point.
Yeah.
I have this hypothesis that in this digital decade, value is going to be created increasingly by external ecosystems collaboration, not within the boundaries of the traditional boundaries, employment contracts, consulting contracts. So the value exchange and the value creation is going to go beyond the traditional boundaries. And in that world, increasingly, when you bring in external stakeholders, to have this the idea of explicit expectations of what you would do, what I'll get in return back. I think what Susan has been talking about makes a lot of sense to me, but I've been collaborating with her on this ecosystem orchestration initiative. So I'm in complete alignment with what Susan is talking about.
Mm-hmm. How is the power balance in such ecosystems? Is it very different from internal negotiations?
Depending on the role, who's going to become the orchestrator, right? The predominant orchestrator will essentially determine the rules of the game. And then if he wants to attract more participants, more stakeholders, then he has to give and take. In fact, we have this naive idea that the orchestrators at some point should disappear, right? That's a more holistic view. Okay, you came in, you orchestrated an ecosystem. Once it comes to a sufficient value creation flow, self-sustaining, you go create another orchestration is what the ideal thing would be. But if there is the value creation, value capture, everybody gets a much bigger pie. Everybody's happy with what has been done. I don't think we'll get there immediately. It'll take some time but having these initial intentions of this is what I'm willing to do, this is what I'm expecting, it's a lot more important because it is not a paycheck for every 2 weeks, dollar per hour, or a milestone based, because it is all output. When you have a journey for a shared outcome, then the intentions become a lot more clear. So initially, it's going to be a core group of people who believe in this mission, and then when they show the value, and then other people will join.
Yeah. Interesting. I was wrong about the time, by the way. I don't know why. I thought it was ending at the hour. So we have 30 minutes extra now. Isn't that a relief?
You just like deadlines.
Yeah. Oh, I like to keep it sharp. Yeah, that's true. But Susan, what do you think about this shift to the ecosystem then?
Well, yeah. It is easier to enter into a negotiation when you are between organizations, because you have to make it clear. You're dealing with a blank slate. Whereas inside the organization, if you're approaching it from the position of I want to avoid the power dynamics, which a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. They're protecting their reputation and inside. So I think it actually, the definition of roles has to be more hierarchical what I do find, which is interesting, is I did some research on cooperatives, and so we hear the challenges in traditional organizations, everything's hierarchy. Well, cooperatives have the opposite problem because they think it is a democracy. Now, the DAOs, the new form of smart contracts, and that is a fascinating world because now they're getting into quadratic voting, and they're figuring out that that they've got to finagle the decision making in such a way that that they can't wait for everybody So when you think about the flow, you can see how the hierarchical model, the way it's been rationalized is that we can get things done faster. Okay. Now, but the other side is just as dysfunctional if there is not a clear line of authority, a clear line of accountability, responsibility. So, but yeah, I will say that I think that I do find that people oftentimes they think they're better negotiators than they are, and the best negotiators don't even. It is so innate, it is so tacit that they don't even think about it. And being an entrepreneur, because when I graduated from college, I went into real estate. I became an entrepreneur, and so my survival depended on negotiating and making proposals and coming up with and investigating, because once you have to sweat over payroll and you lose money because your employee didn't follow through on what they had to do, and you had to go and do it again after you paid them to do it, and then you had to compensate for the other. You become very conscious of how to negotiate. So I want to ask Heinz if he'll kind of share his experience with negotiating, because as an entrepreneur, he's looking at it from a very different perspective. Heinz.
Deliberately involving me while I'm relaxing. Well,
And hey, we've got you in a place and experience where you're going to really share. So yes, so drink
yeah,
that
I
beer.
think I'm typical. I'm typical somebody who's not aware. It is just a part of my life. So making decisions is in a split second. But the best way by building something up is maybe let me go one step back. I'm in the whole story a little bit worried about the term outcome. So I always expect people outcome is very related to trust for me. So I always ask it. But nowadays I know that everything should be based on low dependency. So if we try to predict something in the future, outcome becomes very uncertain over time. If it's closer by and we see the dependencies and there are no lacking dependencies, we know we can manage outcome more easily and the lesser people. So for myself, I learned by doing business that I always look at, can I achieve these outcomes? And I think the funny thing is that I think Wolfgang also knows me like that. So I take decisions very fast. Either you go and you fall also a lot. So you make a lot of small mistakes, some big mistakes, you fall a lot. But over time, something happens in your brain that you can keep on going, making these decisions. And the whole process of that becomes more efficient and also more strategic behind. So behavior you can see on the outside doesn't say anything about what's going on the inside anymore. That makes it so there's a lot of strategy involved, but it's being incorporated in your body over time. But I don't only by doing, and I research. I think we all research. I don't research in a different way, I guess. So curiosity and imagination is research for me. That's it. And I'm totally the things Iptasam were saying are related to this session about research about your opponent. I totally agree with the fact that we all lack of doing that, but sometimes also really difficult. So you just get a very short moment of airtime, especially in sales of propositions or in enterprise. If they have set really real boundaries of somebody comes in, they sit and they put something on the table and you need to react on it. I really like doing that, but you can shoot next to the target pretty easily. they don't allow you to sometimes you just don't know what's sitting in front of you. You need to use your intuition.
Depends.
And that, I will say, I want to say though that, you know, intuition, in fact, if you read the literature, it says that most leaders are making decisions on their intuition. They're not, you know, making these calculated decisions. But, you know, so financial institutions, investors, anytime you've got a large sum of money, there's due diligence is a term that investors know. And so when I'm doing due diligence for buying an apartment or buying a company, then I'm going to have a checklist of probably 100 things. And I'm not just gathering that information, I'm verifying it. I'm getting documentation on it. Now, that is the standard protocol. And what you'll find is that investors, lenders, they will tend to they will specialize in a particular industry. They'll specialize in a particular type of financing because they can validate and understand what the parameters of the boundaries are. So understand that if I'm negotiating with someone, it's not necessarily a yes or no. It may just be that you have to make the scope smaller, make the boundary smaller of what you're trying to propose. So, for example, if I am dealing with an organization I know nothing about, then I'm going to actually create a proposal that is small enough that I can control the scope of the work and not have to worry about all the crap they're going to throw at me because that's not in the scope. Now, once and when I'm investigating and I'm in that proposal, I'm going to add value, but I'm also continuing to investigate to find out what it is that I'm dealing with. What is all of those things that's going to come up that I know that if I put my little toe in it, then I'm going to get sucked under the current. So understand that that's kind of where context, order, and boundaries are. Now, let me also say that don't think that your negotiation is with one person or one company. In fact, I'll suggest that I've been fascinated with what's going on the world stage, because what you'll see is the dynamics that's going on. Now, if I were to put it into the context of a business, you can think of your value chain or your supply chain or your network, or all those ways that you can maneuver and gain power and gain information and gain influence if you understand that every situation is going to have interlopers, influencers, distractors, destroyers, and so you have to understand how to navigate and get to the people who are going to be able to make that decision and drive the outcomes further. And so, and to your point, Hans, how we define outcomes, that really is the first step is how are we defining outcomes?
I want to say something because I think we're missing a point here. And that Hans made a statement that I find really interesting, and I want to push back on that one. So they come with they come in, and you don't even have time to explore because they have already set the boundaries and the scope, and you know basically the negotiation that you have before anything else is the negotiation about, is this what we are negotiating about? Since I've worked with Susan, I've done actually more jumping out of the frames than ever before, where people start a conversation thinking or assuming that we are going to negotiate about Y or X or Z. And within 3 minutes, I stop them and say, I didn't think that was what we're going to talk about. Is this really what is important right now? And I just had it this afternoon. Someone was negotiating about my hourly rates, and they were expecting me to fight back. I could see it, right? They had already made the assumption this is going to be a tough negotiation because I'm too expensive and they want me for less. And I completely tripped them up by saying, I'm not interested in hourly rates. I'm interested in what you actually want to achieve. And so I just said, so tell me what you want to achieve and let's not talk about rates at all. And within 3 minutes, we had a conversation about what they wanted and that they had no clue how to get there. And I think I can now charge 3 times the amount that they thought they were fighting me for. So don't accept the premise of the opening bid, which is not even a bid about the content, it's a bid about the scope. And I think that's become, and it's not a trick, it's become an essential part of getting clarity about why are we even talking?
I think, Bart, that's true. So the research, if you talk about research as Iptisan saying, then you should not, one thing, always know that you're not talking with one person, but with an enterprise. It's seldom that you talk with one, and within boundaries. And it's also, research is being done in a split second. Research is,
it's fast.
So one of the tactics could be, because we know that Russia and Ukraine sitting on the table, and actually they were both there, and they didn't even, their first session, they didn't even understand what they were asking from each other. That is well known. They're sitting there and like this, they're sitting here and they go away and they found some point because maybe some electrons they jumped and but they needed to get back and see if. But in general, what I find at the moment also what we can learn about is that everybody is actually reacting intuitively, emotional in this current situation. And as soon as you try to get into nuance, just to do this research, actually, what you can be, you suddenly even move out of because you're not allowed.
You can jump out of the frame, but here's the thing that I keep thinking about this current situation, but how it reflects on business as well. How many people seriously go in thinking, let me find out what would constitute a real win for the other person? I mean, if you go in with that question in your mind, how can I find out what they would consider a real win? And then add the next question, and how can I enable that win and not consider it a loss for me? You already have a completely different frame of mind. I find that was one of the other tipping points for me, is if I go in thinking, how do I get something out of this? I'm not exploring the other person's position. But if I go in with what would constitute a win for them, I already have a different frame of mind. Jean-Sebastian is putting that yellow hand up again. It's really scary.
Scary yellow hand. No, it's something like most people mention, and you did mention it early on. What's your name already? Digital transformation, a flow movement.
Oh, that is Hans. He's joined our company.
Okay, Hans. You mentioned it. It's like most people see negotiation as you have an opponent, and when you have an opponent, like you kind of need to win. And it's something I tackled in a conference I did a few years ago. It was like, as designer, we always like put ourselves like against programmers, against the client, and always in a negotiation. But at some point, if you change your mindset and it's part of the team, and you put the client inside your team, your negotiations process is not the same. It's not negotiation by opposition. It's negotiation it's problems. It becomes problem solving.
Yes, and that's I could react on that. So I have multiple companies, and one of the companies is Sprong, and within this company we have a contract form which is called a tandem contract. Means that you focus on putting the client on front, you on the back, delivering creativity, energy, and a lot of things, but it's constant communication. And the contract is not about when are we finished, because in our business we are never finished. It's always continuous. That's why I'm a big fan of flow. And what you need to focus at is which metrics do we need to define that we are at least increasing. So we start sort of evolution, and are we getting there by building elements constantly there where we want to be? And I had to complete, and now it's like that in Amsterdam, there's the first law firm focusing on these kind of contracts on big scale. First one in the Netherlands, maybe globally, I don't know, but in the Netherlands, because they really believe that those big enterprises, they try to solve it by big contracts and blocks of work. But it never, then you get the outcome problem, because you define it based on very high dependencies, and it's very unpredictable at the same time. So you create complexity already on beforehand, which is just unreachable. This is something a lot of conventional managers still don't understand, I guess. System complexity is the essence of flow. Solving that, in a sense, is the essence of flow.
And so the more complexity, then what your strategy is to simplify. But I also want to point out that when you're investigating, you're listening for also what's not being said. If I have someone who they're not interested in exploring my outcome, that's saying a lot. It's in fact one of the so my first business was actually in the rental business, and I managed a couple of thousand rental contracts, and I was qualifying tenants, and so it was the information that wasn't there that raised more red flags than any bad information ever did. But I also want to say that that I also have rental property, and what I found was that I did a much better job for other people than I do for myself. So there is something to be said for understanding, who's the agent and who's the principal. And Bart and I have talked about this, but understanding that we have many roles, and we are fairly, what you're going to, I think what we're going to see in the Ukrainian situation is that it is going to be the influencers that end up making the biggest impact on this. In the news, it was India, who is trying to stay out of it, that actually reached out to Putin and said, "You need to respect the world order. We do not want the world against us." And so, there is also that point about understanding how to, where the power is, and how to leverage power, how to leverage constraints, so that you are framing things in such a way that everybody is as close to reality as possible, and understand that reality is changing every day. So,
but here's the thing we talked about first, right? Is that if you influence a person in power, then one of the most important things you do is you give them a graceful way out.
Absolutely.
Right? As long as you go head to head and make it impossible for them to retreat in a graceful way, in a way that they can even sell as a win to themselves, then you have an ongoing conflict. So I think what is missing in these hardcore negotiations often is they don't even start with the graceful way out. They completely throw that off the table first. There is no graceful way out. And then the only outcome is lose-lose.
If you got nothing, you got nothing to lose, and that's the most dangerous position to be in.
Yeah.
Now, and
you have two hands. You have two hands.
Oh, we have two hands. We have Wolfgang's hand and we have Keene's hand.
Ladies first.
Ladies first. Wolfgang. Keene. Sorry.
Yeah, Wolfgang, you were actually first, but
I just want to wrap it up, and maybe we only have 5 minutes.
He's out of fires.
So if you're going to wrap it up, then I'm going to be first. That's fine.
You're going to first.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's nothing. No, I was actually just going to. I've been thinking about this, I think, throughout the whole 1.5 hours, basically, because it's something that Bart touched upon previously, and it's been kind of coming back ever since. And it's the soft parts of it, which keep, and that's something I'm, maybe more fascinated by than most. But it's And I keep thinking about in my daily job, a lot of what I do is leadership coaching. And I started off with saying that we don't necessarily talk about negotiation as much in our common business language, other than when it's explicit. And then I was kind of thinking about what do I do in my leadership coaching, and kind of realizing that a lot of what I do is kind of coaching
negotiation.
And what I do then is actually and I think again with the language, because it's just the word basically that's still sort of in the Norwegian culture, but also because a lot of the negotiation skills I'm coaching are very soft, kind of going towards the soft things. And I often talk about motivation and personal motivation of your opponent. So we talked about
also non-verbal.
Yes, exactly.
It's the whole thing.
Yes, it's the
FBI negotiators. I was really surprised to read a report about a top FBI negotiator, and his first chapter was, my goal is to help the person that I'm negotiating with to find a way out.
Yes.
Right?
Chris Voss.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the type of conversations I'm having with my mentees, or whatever I call them. It's basically like, how do you understand whoever your stakeholders who you're negotiating with? And it's always going to be several people, as you mentioned. And one of my key points is often that they're going to have a personal motivation, and it's going to be personal. Because they're people and they have feelings. So you have to be able to kind of dig into that, because if you're going by the company strategy, that's not going to get you far at all. You have to really go a step deeper and get into what's the personal motivation. And in order to understand that, you have to go by the kind of the social game, the non-verbal language, as you're saying, just kind of
the guilt, the shame.
Exactly. Facts are not getting you anywhere.
Oh yeah,
exactly. And all those attachment styles you're mentioning, and what you were saying, not the what's not being said, all of these things. And I just realized that I think 90% of my coaching is going towards that area.
Yes.
And as I've been speaking, I've been thinking, well, I guess that's also negotiation. It's just I don't use that word.
Anything anywhere there's an interdependency, there's negotiation. So the only time you don't need to negotiate is when there's no interdependency.
Exactly.
So I'll end this with an invitation that what would be cool is if we could bring a particular scenario to the table, and let's kind of hash that out, because that's actually doing that is kind of like we're going to learn how to play notes versus we're going to learn how to orchestrate a song. So we need to have a sheet music to really experience it, and I think that's understanding that negotiation is more like learning sports or music than it is about technical knowledge, is the first part. So thank you, Wolfgang.
That leaves Wolfgang.
Okay.
Right?
Just to wrap it up, we have 1 minute left. Just a question. So I think for me this was interesting and very rich and quite complementary to the usual mapping stuff. So in the last 2 years, we've been discussing a lot about Agile language and Milky Way maps and how to place the pieces. And of course, there's a whole universe behind how to place these pieces. So very much welcome. And thank you for this presentation and discussion. The final question is, at a certain point of time, we will offer a certification program for enterprise design coaches, enterprise designers, Agile practitioners, however we will call the role. What would this mean for the curriculum? So can we offer some, how to make the next step into practical application? Yeah, I think for me, this is what felt like leading edge. So I think ahead of the curve. So really that's a great inspiration. But for me, the next question is, okay, how can we bring this to all companies on this planet? What are the next steps? So
that is a negotiation in and of itself. Maybe that's the one we bring to the table.
Hans is putting his hand up, so Hans may already have an answer.
The answer, good.
The first thing my advice is stop thinking in the fact that you should deliver certification, because it's it's completely against any form of learning.
Okay.
So that's really not going to work if you want to scale in the world. It's very old-fashioned, to be honest. So it's not.
Okay.
What you need to envision is you need to build something which is which supplies a learning cycle, and then keep the people in and keep on learning and learning and go beyond that, because
Okay.
it's what we do every time. The classical way we thought of something great, and now we're gonna certificate, weet je? And
Yeah.
now we're gonna and what then?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
anyway,
But okay.
it's so as fluid as it can be. Also, so the whole thing, there were two things actually. I and then I'm moving fast out of it again. I think in terms of if edgy or whatever kind of everything doesn't add to flow in the organization, then whatever we try to design, so the moving, if you can't define moving into a direction or moving forward, then it's no sense to talk about flow. And if we can't do that, it's especially no sense of talking about whatever design technique in the world, in my opinion.
Okay.
So if they do not interact with each other, and flow on itself means also constant learning. So certification is something we need to get rid of, because it also pulls people out. It's canceling.
Yeah, okay, maybe, but okay, but what do we need to do to help them to learn whatever? So what's the next step to make it applicable for the regular people, for the usual guys?
So, a pricing model is a form of structured negotiation. And so that this comes back to your business model, which is a conversation that would be interesting to have with everybody. I would like to just kind of wrap up and ask, can anybody share, what was a takeaway from our conversation today for you?
I'll go first. I want to say something about, I think what Jean-Sébastien said, and it was more or less about what he said, that when you are negotiating, you are not going against the person. And I think that's something that I find very interesting, because in a way, when you're negotiating, I would say that sometimes you think that it's you against the other person, but really, this is going to sound very cliche, but it's you against yourself. That's how I see it. So, and that you yourself can get in the way of this negotiation. So that's how I see it. And you kind of need to put the ego aside, so to say, to be able to, to get this negotiation done. So I think towards the end, when he made that comment that it's not you against the person, it kind of made something, I would say, click, and so to say, in a way where, it really isn't you against someone else. Because, and like you said, a lot of people like to make negotiations about conflict, and that's not the case. Negotiations are not about conflict. So for me, that's a major takeaway.
Awesome, thank you.
May I? I'll say, I think, Bard, you said, like, when you're negotiating, you need to give the opponent here a graceful way out. If you want to have other like negotiation session, or like making sure that there's their perception of the win, I think is pretty interesting. The other one, I think, is more of the question when Suzanne, mostly at the beginning, you said, like, ask manager what decision you took today, and then, like, I asked them what choices did you had today, and like these two questions are kind of the same thing, but the reaction of the people won't be the same. You're looking for the same thing, but the way you ask the question seems to be pretty powerful there for me.
Powerful questions.
Yeah.
That's
a
good
fascinating
part of negotiation.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyone else?
Now, let me ask a question. It's more of a comment and a question. In fact, I'm going to have a conversation with a partner on an opportunity. We're working for a very large customer. They have a technology, we have the customer relationship. So the way I would love to frame this, based on what he just said, is kind of 3 time frames. Here is a traditional way of partnering, right? this is what typically we do. You bring something, we go deliver value, and then we somehow find a way to what the value has been captured. But also I want to paint the picture saying, but I don't want to stop there, right? There is a step 2 and step 3, so that you basically paint a picture of 2025. Right? This is where we can be together, right? Then we can step back and say, okay, now how do we move forward beyond step 1? So kind of paint a picture of a shared, a better future state together. If there's an agreement, then the rest becomes a lot easier. We got to agree on the first step. But if there is a vision on, that's where he says, yeah, that's what I want to be by 2025. So I'm going to take your idea and then paint the picture of a shared future where we agree. So there is less friction about how do we negotiate the
Divide the
sharing of the value
spoils.
today.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we're
Yeah.
a bit out of time, so
Kina?
Well, I think I've maybe I've shared sort of mine already, I think, in the
Yeah.
last comment, but also just want to agree with everything that's been said by the others after that. So.
Yes, and a
John?
great conversation,
John?
guys. Thank you.
John, do you have a last word to add? I think John is gone.
Sorry, no, I couldn't find the mute button.
Okay.
Well, my last comment, I think I need to reconsider in my head the whole concept of negotiation. So it's been enlightening.
Good.
What more
I
can
think
you
we
ask
all
for?
do, John.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
Especially because I thought he was talking about the nuke button.
No. That's
It's
another
flow, it's always a
negotiation.
flow.
You're in a different negotiation, Hans.
Oh, sorry.
okay. Any more feedback? No, then let's close the session. We're running out of time. But for me, the big question is always how can we make it applicable and how can we bring it to trainings, whatever. So that's
Yeah.
a good source of inspiration. Not surprising for me. So thank you very much, Susan and
Thank you,
Bart.
guys. Been
But
great.
it's somewhat alien but always extending the viewpoints. That's why I invited you to exactly achieve this. So mission accomplished, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, and have a nice day in USA, and everybody else have a nice and in Canada, of course, have a nice afternoon, and have a nice evening in Europe.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Norway.
thank you for organizing all of it.
Yeah.
See you
Yes.
soon.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Have a great day.